I think we got bad news for the NHRA guys, and this is a video I've been thinking about for a long time that I have avoided making, that I really didn't want to make, but we got some images coming in from the NHRA US Nationals, the granddaddy, NHRA's version of the Super Bowl, their biggest race of the year. And these images confirm a trend that I've been seeing for the last several years. How you doing, racing fans? It is your boy Racing Jack here, and we need to dive into an issue that is not going to be popular with everyone, but I think it's one we need to face. And my question is, what has happened to the live event audience at NHRA drag races? Now, you take a look at some of these images that I will show you right now. Not terrible. There are still bodies there for sure, and I'm sure NHRA can show some selective shots that show people at the biggest race of the year. That's the way it should be, but I will tell you this right now. As a guy who loves drag racing, loves motorsports, who's been going to national events for decades, what I'm seeing from the US Nationals is a shell of its former self. That place used to be elbow to elbow in the grandstands, and I've noticed this at a lot of other tracks for the past several years. But what I think here in 2025, I think we are rapidly decreasing, and I'm starting to get concerned. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Let's talk about it, and I certainly want your opinion down below, because after all, if we don't have this discussion, there's no chance of fixing this. I think reason number one, and this is something that is plaguing a lot of forms of motorsports, is I don't think the next generation is coming. And we can go look up hardcore data. I'm giving you the eyeball test. I've been to a lot of NHRA national events over the past 20 years, and I don't see the younger fan base being interested. Now, let's back up for a second and talk about my generation, the 35 to 50 generation right now. Why do most of us enjoy drag racing? What I found is we probably had a parent who exposed us to it, or a family member, or a close friend, and because of that, we like the sport as well. So for me, case in point, it's because of my dad. My dad started taking me to races when I was 4 years old and fell in love with the sport. Now, why does my dad's generation love drag racing? Well, from what I can understand and what I can find, back in the 60s and 70s, car culture was what it was all about. An opportunity to go to a live event like this was cherished and coveted. My dad used to build models of his favorite dragsters. This was the magazine era, where magazines, car magazines, motorsports magazines, used to be the gold standard. What I worry about now is, how many kids do you know that build models, look at car magazines? Now, I suppose the Facebook reel has replaced what was a car magazine back then, but I just don't see this new generation getting interested the way the older generation was. And that begs the question, what does that mean for the future of drag racing? Number two biggest reason this year, and this is a story I have scoured the internet, this is one nobody seems to want to talk about, and it is a big one that would explain a rapid decline here in 2025. And this is NHRA's first full season without arguably the biggest star the sport has ever seen, the biggest draw the sport has ever seen. I'm talking about the great Mr. John Force. What a treasure this man was to drag racing for so many years. Still is, because his team's still out there. But John, if you don't know, unfortunately last year in Virginia had a nasty crash. What we believe now could very well be a career-ending crash. It looks that way. And I'm so thankful John's still with us, because this was devastating, the impact. And John's in his 70s. So John has not competed since, and many experts speculate that he will never compete again. And I think that's a wise decision, because as much as John probably wants to be in that car at 70 years old plus, you got to take care of your health. But some of you may be saying, hey, there's still drivers out there, and NHRA is trying to cultivate and market. And listen, this is no disrespect to the people that are out there, but let's talk about entertainment, okay? Entertainment is star-driven. Whether it's sports, you boil it down, is entertainment. That's certainly what's important to the business side of sport. So think about all those years. The NBA was carried by Michael Jordan. All those years, the WWF was carried by Hulk Hogan and The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin. All those years, the UFC was carried by Chuck the Iceman Liddell and Tito Ortiz and all these big names. Think about how boxing was carried by Mike Tyson for all those years, and then Floyd Mayweather for all those years. It takes star power. And what happened to NHRA is they lost their biggest draw, their biggest attraction, their biggest star. That is not to say the folks there that are all great friends of mine, most of them aren't important, talented, spending a ton of money. But this is a problem that I started ringing the alarm on 20 years ago. And that is NHRA's biggest stars are grandpas. John Force, Big Daddy Don Garlits. Legends, love them. But this is a sport that's been unable to cultivate new names. And that is one way to connect with this next generation, to have that next big, amazing crossover star. And I don't see it happening. Now, one thing I will say before you guys, some of you are probably jumping through the screen. What about Tony Stewart? Amen. NHRA is so lucky to have Tony Stewart right now. And I hope he understands how much he's appreciated by drag racing fans for being out there, because the cachet he brings, the name that he brings, the resume that he brings. Tony Stewart's one of the biggest stars ever in the history of NASCAR. And I told him when I did an interview with him, as I said, look, you've done just about everything in motorsports. Thank you for being here. And he gets it. He understands the crossover appeal, how he's trying to bring some of those old NASCAR fans, some of those, dirt track fans out to a drag race to watch him compete. But I think that even Tony Stewart would tell you, in the drag racing realm, trying to fill the shoes of the biggest star of all time is certainly not easy. And I also question what Tony's long-term future in the sport will be, because it's amazing. I knew right away, and I'm sure a lot of you did, with the driving talent that Tony Stewart has, he was going to be successful here. But I heard him say on an interview with Bubba the Love Sponge that he's already talking about maybe putting his wife back in a dragster and maybe going to four wheels. So who knows what the future holds for Tony Stewart. But as for now, I think NHRA has a major problem bringing people out to live events. And what can be done to fix this? I don't know. Here's another problem I think we have from a marketing standpoint. I want to take you all the way back to the year 2008. We lost the late, great Scott Coletta. It was just devastating. Died in a funny car crash in Englishtown, New Jersey. After that, an immediate reaction was to shorten the course to 1,000 feet. Drag racing is typically a quarter mile. That's how it always was, 1,320 feet. At that point, and how couldn't you at that point, if you were a driver after what happened to Scott, be in agreement, we need to change to 1,000 feet? Well, here's the problem. For purists of the sport, this changed everything. This is changing the length of a football field. This is changing a baseball diamond. This is changing your parameters of your sport. Purists hated it, me being one of them. And I'll go on the record saying, I am all about safety. I want this sport to be safe. I don't want to see anybody get injured. I don't want to see anybody get killed. But the promoter in me, I would much rather slow the cars down than shorten the length of the course. Because even to this day, I think we have a hard time understanding how these 1,000-foot numbers carry over to quarter, right? You look at all these great milestones, the first 6-second pass, the first 5-second pass, the first 300-mile-an-hour pass, and they were all done on the quarter mile. So I'll tell you, I'm not going to drop any names here, but some very, very high-ranking nitro players in the NHRA gave me a very astute observation, and they said what they found through match racing is fans aren't as enamored with ET and speed as the sanctioning body thinks they are. Fans are enamored with the noise, side-by-side racing, but what they found is they could go to a match race, detune the car, run a second behind their pace, and nobody's asking for their money back. They're still happy. So that plays into the point that I'm trying to make, that maybe we should have stayed quarter mile what drag racing should be and slowed these vehicles down, because I'll even argue that I think the Big Daddy Don Garlits told me this himself. I think the races are over too quickly. I wouldn't mind 6-second race, 5-second race. I think this is why people love nostalgia funny cars. These races with Top Fuel dragsters and funny cars are over so quickly. And that brings me to another point that has always been a tough sell for drag racing. And I had another very astute journalist and veteran of the sport grab me 20 years ago because we would cover motorcycles. We were very in tune with the pro stock motorcycle class, and we really didn't watch a lot of Top Fuel Funny Car. And finally, at the Gator Nationals in Gainesville, we said, let's go on top of the tower and watch. And we both were, I got to admit, because we had been there so many times, it had kind of lost its luster. Now, why do I say that? He made a quote to me that I'll never forget. He said, once you get over the novelty of fuel drag racing, there's not a whole lot to talk about. And I agree in that regard. If you take a look at the sport, what is the most impressive thing about drag racing? It's being there, it's feeling it, it's smelling it, it's your chest rumbling. My favorite thing to do is take somebody who's never been there, put them on the starting line while a top fuel dragster goes down the racetrack. Man, it's almost violent. It'll make your nose bleed. But sustainability and a great story, when you look at those elements, how long can that survive? And how long can those elements carry over to television? Which is another problem I want to bring up. Now, there's been a lot of rumors speculating about the future of NHRA media. Television has always been a huge part of their business model. Why is that? Because back in the day, when Winston was involved and Budweiser and Miller Lite, they used to have an ESPN package. And this was something they would use to help sell sponsorships, help sell exposure. They now have a Fox Sports 1 package. And one thing I want everybody out there to understand is if you have a product that is desired, a la college football, NFL, there's a bidding war for rights to that. NHRA does not have such situation. They have to pay for the production and the airtime on Fox Sports 1. Once a year, once or twice a year, they're given what they call an NFL adjacent time slot, which gives them some pretty big numbers because people were leaving the TV on after an NFL game on Fox. But my question is, how many people are truly staying after that Kansas City Buffalo game to watch NHRA Drag Racing? How many new fans are truly coming out of this situation? So here's where we are. There's been rumblings that NHRA is really, with right now the state of the sport being in decline. And when I say decline, back to my 1,000-foot argument, the great Bill Bader from Summit Motorsports Park tells me, just like me, he's all for safety. He says when they change the course to 1,000 feet, there's a data point that shows we have been in decline since 2008 with drag racing. Now, of course, we did have the financial recession in there, but I would argue at this point, there's some other forms of motorsports doing well, and NHRA has seemed to be in a steady state of decline since then. So what does that mean for this TV deal? Is NHRA going to be able to afford it? Take a look at some of the names and some of the sponsors that are left. And I'll give you another aside from 20 years ago that I know there was a meeting with a high-ranking beer sponsor. This was 20, 25 years ago, where such racer was called in and shown the NHRA TV ratings and said, here's what we're paying. We can't justify paying for these TV ratings. They're that low. So I've seen NHRA dress up some press releases with different Nielsen information, and here's our rating. Here's what we get on the replay. But the fact remains, I believe that there's some smoke and mirrors in TV ratings. I don't think there's smoke and mirrors on digital. And if you look at the NHRA product right now, you're looking at a YouTube channel that only has 264,000 subscribers. Got way more than that on Cycle Drag YouTube. Their Facebook page, I think it's at 1.8 million followers. Cycle Drag, a motorcycle outlet, just me, not a racing organization, me with a camera, is at 165. So I've almost surpassed NHRA. I think that is another indictment on how they failed to connect with this new digital audience. Another story I'd like to tell is Gainesville 2001. That was my first NHRA National. I was a freshman at the University of Florida. We went out on a Friday, my roommate and I, and a group of racers, and oh boy, I was just blown away. You know, I've been to NFL games, I've been to MLB games, and the mass of humanity in 2001 was crazy. You couldn't get near John Force's trailer. This is on a Friday, a work day. You couldn't get near Big Daddy Don Garlich's trailer. He was still racing. On the motorcycle side, you couldn't get near Angel Sampay's trailer. I have VHS videos of all this. You couldn't find an empty spot in the grandstands. That's how hot racing and NHRA was back in this year. When you were coming into the track, there'd be a big long line of traffic. When you looked over at the campground, there wouldn't be a spot available. Well, fast forward now to 2025, and I'm not seeing that at all. And when I talk about some of the smoke and mirrors, I go back to 2001, and I remember I brought one of my journalist friends from the University of Florida with me, and he asked a question to Don Robertson, who was the track manager at Gainesville at the time. And he said, "Sir, the Gator Nationals, is it a sellout?" And Don laughed and said, "Son, we're never sold out. We got 300 acres of property, and we'll always sell you a general admission ticket." And I never forgot that, because Don was so right. Back then, the demand was so high and drag racing was so hot, they didn't care if they ran out of grandstand space. The property was big enough that you could safely have as big of a crowd that was going to come. If 100,000 people were going to come, if 150,000 people were going to come, 200,000 people, you're talking about 300 plus acres of property, and you weren't sold out. So now today, what do you see from the NHRA? Constantly we get a press release about this race sold out, that race sold out, Arizona sold out. You never used to hear that. And I look at some of these races, and the grandstands are so small. They are so minuscule. And if you really dissect what sold out means, that means sold out of reserved seating. You know, general admission, that's a whole nother topic that we're going to get into right now, that at some events is not even being offered. I witnessed that firsthand, unfortunately, at Chicago at the Route 66 Nationals. If you were at the Route 66 Nationals the last few years, you noticed one side of the massive grandstands were completely closed. One side was open. Why did NHRA do that? Pretty smart, in my opinion. I used to work for WWE, and that's a trick that they would use all the time. If you're playing Spokane, Washington on a Tuesday and the house is not great, they used to dim the lights, bring everybody down, hard camera shoots that crowd, all of a sudden it looks like a jam-packed event. As an organization, as a league, as entertainment, you never want that much empty space in your grandstands. You never want that perception. So that's what NHRA did at Chicago. They knew demand wasn't going to be that high. It's still a massive track, but they closed one entire section of the grandstands. The thing that irked me is I was standing out there with a good buddy of mine who can back me up on this story. This is Friday morning, and fans were being told general admission tickets are not available. How could general admission tickets not be available to a drag race on Friday that barely anybody was at, to be honest with you? The reason for that, they didn't want to sell general admission. They wanted to sell a reserved ticket, which was much, much more money, which would also guarantee that they would have a body up in the stands, as opposed to a lot of people. Some people buy tickets to drag races and never make it to the stands. You can watch from the fence. You can cruise the pits. There's a million different ways to do it. But right now, we're seeing, you know, the general admission ticket is kind of going away in some instances, at least from what I have observed. And that leads us to another big reason that I think cost has gotten way out of control. I've heard some of the stories that some people have spent hundreds and even thousands to take their family to a drag race. And I think that's something where NHRA really, in my mind, needs to reevaluate everything. The fact that they operate as a nonprofit organization, and some of you may not be aware of that. NHRA operates as a nonprofit organization, tax exempt. Now, the downfall for NHRA is executive pay is public. And here's another story. I'm not going to get into too much in this video because we could do 10 videos on this, but there is major tension right now between the teams spending big money and the NHRA and the executives that are making huge money. I'm talking deep six figures, some over $500,000. Keep in mind, we just came out of a COVID era where we saw payouts slashed. We saw a lot of things get decreased, some things taken away. And when some of these racers who are successful businessmen or women in their own right see what a lot of these executives are making, they wonder, is it something that's essential? Is this a proper way for this organization to be run. So those are one of the problems. That's another major problem right now plaguing the NHRA. And one other thing that I'd like to talk about that I think was a major blow that not a lot of people want to mention is what happened during the COVID year. Because this was COVID, I think a lot of people, again, it's just a story that's kind of swept under the rug. Winston was a sponsor for NASCAR and NHRA for so many years. I think they were with NHRA for like 27 years. Very successful. We knew big tobacco was on its way out of a lot of different things. Around 2002-ish comes Coca-Cola. Great find for the NHRA. That led to an 18-year sponsorship through Powerade, Full Throttle, Mellow Yellow. Well, what happened during COVID was very telling. Coca-Cola ended their sponsorship a couple years early and wanted completely out of the NHRA. NHRA's response was, hey, you're using a pandemic to wiggle out of a deal and you shouldn't do that. I think that here's the sad situation that hurt the NHRA. That wasn't Joe's Trailers. That wasn't Mike's Hot Dogs. That's Coca-Cola. That's a powerhouse. They have a brand to worry about. And my question is, why? Why did Coca-Cola want to end their deal 2 years early? What did they see with the data, the TV ratings, the grandstands that I've been seeing with these eyes for a long time, even though I don't want this? I'm no hater. I'd love to see motorsports continue to flourish. But what did Coca-Cola see that made them end this deal 2 years early? Now, we'll never know because this is locked up in non-disclosure agreements and was settled. And then NHRA went on to find Camping World as a sponsor. That was short-lived. Camping World is no longer the title sponsor. Enter Mission Foods, who seems to be just a godsend. From what I understand, the man in charge at Mission Foods loves motorsports. He's putting a lot of money into a lot of different forms of racing, and that's really appreciated. But again, we wonder, how long will that last? The IHRA has started up with a new owner, Daryl Cuddle, and they're going after the NHRA with some very reasonable ticket prices. I'm talking $40 for a weekend, and we've seen the NHRA, the IHRA flounder the last few years. I've even worked for them for a couple years and had insight on that it's very tough sledding for them as well. But I'll tell you, boy, if there was ever a time to go after NHRA, this could be the time. If you watch some of the coverage we did on Racing Jack YouTube, we were there at the first IHRA National at National Trail Raceway, now called Dorana Raceway, which was purchased by the new owner of the IHRA. So this man's very smart, and he's got a lot of funding behind him. That NHRA controlled the game for so long because they controlled the tracks. Well, now this gentleman is buying up racetracks. Bought Galat in North Carolina. He bought Milan. He just bought Darlington. So IHRA is coming back with a very impressive portfolio of tracks, and whoever is leading this marketing charge, IHRA is looking to be the anti-NHRA, giving back to these racers. In fact, I heard a story that Daryl hand-delivered bags of ice to every trailer and fed everybody. And it was amazing. And why I think that's going to go a long way is where we're at now. Keep in mind, the way NHRA operated 30 years ago is you had guys like Kenny Bernstein. They had massive contracts with Budweiser. Budweiser told them when to be, where they had to be. I understand with some of these big deals, probably like in NASCAR too, if you missed a race, you got fined. You were in breach of your agreement with that sponsor. That sponsor is with you for exposure, okay? And NHRA knew that, so they could be the boss. They could do whatever they wanted. But here's where the game has changed. Take a look at the top fuel dragster ranks right now. What major corporate sponsors do we have? I mean, it's great. Monster Energy is in there with Brittany Force. That's great. But you look at a Mike Salinas, another gift to the NHRA. Here's a man, successful businessman, who's going to pump $9+ million a year into his program to come play. You look at Torrance, self-funded with Capco. So what you have now, and even Tony Stewart has sponsors, but I'm sure he's putting in some of his money. So what you have now is you have all these successful businessmen that are coming out to play with their own money. And now it has been a big power struggle of who's got the clout. And that there's no more Budweiser telling Kenny Bernstein, you better not miss the Western Swing. And that's why if you saw a lot of teams sit out the Western Swing, if you're locked into the countdown and this is your money, why? Depending on what your objective is, if your objective is to win a championship or just to have fun, why do you need to follow the schedule that NHRA puts out? So right now, I think that is a major problem as well. The conflict between the racers, the very successful business people, and the highly paid executives. Something is going to give. I know this for a fact behind the scenes. Haven't done a whole lot of stories on it, but in the last few years, some of these big name racers have looked for alternatives and have questioned the way NHRA is running a lot of things. As an example, that maybe there's too much greed at play. You look at what some of the executives are paid at NHRA. Top Fuel Harley is a class that I loved. It went away, had about a $10,000 an event payout. For $100,000, you can have them for 10 races a year. They were cut. I know this experience from my involvement with the Top Fuel Motorcycle Series that I helped get in the NHRA and working directly with their sales team. This is what you have. You have to pay to play. This is what you have to pay to show up, or you're not going to be a part of it. And as nominal as that fee may be compared to some of these executives' pay, it's a hardline stance. So what we're seeing in the IHRA now, you saw that Daryl Cuttle gobbled up Top Fuel Harley, and he's paying them. And they're very happy to be there. So I think we're in for a very interesting few years. And I certainly, like I said, I hope NHRA can figure this out. I hope they can find a way to connect with a younger audience. But even on my level, NHRA for years, they've been the boss. They've told media what to do. I know these photographers back in the day, you can't sell NHRA photos and there's all these restrictions. And I get it. They're protecting their intellectual property. But you look at a guy like me now in the year 2025, if I go to an independent drag race, I have carte blanche. My goal, if a promoter brings me in, a drag bike promoter, a car promoter, any type of promoter, my goal is to just go crazy, work as hard as I can, and get them as much exposure for their race as they can. Do you know, as a content creator, even media credentialed content creator, you cannot show NHRA's professional categories. That has been very murky. It's starting to change. There's been a little leeway with social media. You need a certain wristband for social media because they want to control that product. But I said, wait a minute. How are you going to get promotion? How are you going to connect to this younger audience? You should have 20 guys like me out there with phones in different spots trying to blow this thing up and reach the younger audience. You also need personalities, you need storylines, and you need a whole lot more. And guys, unfortunately, I'm just not seeing the fans come like they used to. I know in Pomona, I've been attending the World Finals since 2018. First year I showed up, I said, wow, this is Pomona. And I could tell it wasn't as big as it used to be on TV or in the pictures. Well, I can tell you this right now, Pomona has fallen off a cliff. They have closed one whole side of the grandstands there. NHRA internally, what they'll tell you, and I have this through sources, is they will say our fans have moved out of California. I'm not buying that. I do know there was a big shift during COVID. A lot of people did move out of California. I would argue there's data that says a lot of those people that love California came back or they didn't go too far. If you're in Nevada, if you're in Arizona, you're certainly close enough to still drive to Pomona, and that does not explain NHRA having to close one whole side of the grandstands for their finals. And that's why I had to speak up, guys, because all this has been on my mind all year. The promoter in me has been thinking about this and what they could possibly do to fix this. And after seeing these images of the granddaddy, the big one, the US Nationals, and maybe the granddaddy is a good word, sadly, because this audience is aging out. It's not getting any younger. It lacks star power. It lacks story. And we can talk about solutions for NHRA, if there are any, in our next video. And I would like for you to leave your comments down below. I mean, just off the top of my head, some things that I've been calling for is when Major League Baseball introduces a pitch clock and says a 3.5-hour baseball game is too long, why are we having a 5-hour drag race where the lights go out on the fans and the entertainment right on cue? I'm a little bit concerned, guys, a little bit concerned with what I'm seeing, but the good news is it's not all of motorsports. As you notice on this channel, if you watch it, we cover a lot of Supercross. We went hot and heavy this year, and when I go to Supercross, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling because I think this must be how my dad felt in the 60s and 70s and his generation at a drag race, because I go to a Supercross race and they're filling Cowboy Stadium, they're filling Anaheim Stadium. We're going to go to drag strips the next 3 weeks and we'll see. I bet they outdraw the NHRA at Charlotte, St. Louis, and Las Vegas. And the youth out there is infectious, and it just provides such a different vibe, such a different energy. And I just wonder, is this how my dad felt at drag races in the 70s? I'm sure it was that vibe. Talking about Columbus, the first NHRA race at Columbus, the Spring Nationals, I think it was in 72, 73, 74, something like that. I was just doing some research. They opened the gate and over 40,000 fans rolled in because it was a rock concert back then. But not much has changed. And I feel like we have a board and we have a group of executives who are still playing from that old, outdated deck. That's what I think. And I think NHRA really lacks a Dana White. They lack a figurehead. They lack somebody selling this thing. God bless Glenn Cromwell, the president of the NHRA. Great guy. Had met him. Don't have a bad thing to say about him. My critique is we really don't hear from him much. Don't hear from anybody hyping this product, hyping the rivalries, the stories. What are the storylines in the NHRA? I don't feel like there are any. I feel like we've been devoid of great rivalries. You know, where's the snake and mongoose, right? Where are all these great battles? I know just from the Pro Stock motorcycle class that I can tell you that I follow closely, the last great draw, and I don't want to offend any of those racers in those class, but to me, what I learned in entertainment, the biggest definition, truest definition of a star is can you put their name on the marquee and can they sell tickets? Tony Stewart, definitely a star. Is anybody in the Pro Stock motorcycle class a draw that can sell tickets? I would argue no. And I mean that with no disrespect, but I mean that if I'm a promoter and I'm going to invest 6 figures into an event and I want to bring in somebody, you look at Gage Herrera, dominant. You look at Matt Smith, great racer. Can I sell tickets off these guys? The last big star of the class Pro Stock motorcycle was the brand Harley Davidson. Harley Davidson left shortly after Coke left. They're now gone. Prior to that, Angèle Sampé was one of the biggest stars in NHRA back when she was sponsored by Winston, winning championships. But since then, where have the stars gone? So again, I would love your thoughts. Love my beloved sport of drag race, and I hope I get to cover it till the day I die. But boy, things are changing fast, and these holes in the stands have got me awfully, awfully concerned. A TV package with a big question mark on it has me awfully concerned. A YouTube channel with under 300,000 subs for the NHRA has me concerned. And I just think the whole paradigm needs to be looked at, turned upside down. It's a 5-day drag race, the US Nationals. I think they might need to work closer to a 5-hour drag race. Let's put on a rock concert. Let's put on a show. Let's go do chip draw off the trailer with no qualifying and give everybody the most can't miss show they've ever seen. Similar to what Bill Bader does for the Night of Fire. He doesn't put on a drag race. He puts on an entertainment spectacle. He told me he doesn't need 16 Top Fuel dragsters to do it. And boy, the biggest crowd I have ever seen in my life, from years ago into the Gator Nationals, from years ago into the US Nationals, is Bill Bader's Night of Fire. And that's what I think is going on in the sport of drag racing right now. They need to get younger. They need new stars. They need to look at shortening the events. They need to be very thankful somebody like Tony Stewart is there. And You need to hope that maybe Tony Stewart can give the rub to that next big star. Will Matt Hagan become a huge star? Antron Brown, a guy that I love. Could he become that next big household name? How about Brittany Force? I mean, she's got a lot of star power as it is, but when you look at Big Daddy Don Garlits, John Force, and the people that truly sold tickets in this sport, where are we now? We're going to have more on this, guys, but thanks so much for watching. Subscribe. And again, your thoughts down below are what I want to know. And again, I want to emphasize I am no hater. I do not want to see this, but it's something that I have said over and over throughout all my exploits and everything that I've covered. If we don't admit there's a problem, if we don't face this, because I can tell you right now, in the NHRA Media Suite, I'm the minority. There's a lot of people in there who are big fans who want to ignore this, which, you know, at the heart of what I cover, I'm a fan too. I'm also a journalist. I'm also a realist. I also deal in fact, and I also deal in the eye test. And there are a lot of people that just want to continually tell you the positives. And when NHRA has that big draw 2, 3, 4 times a year, they'll say, see you haters, we're not in decline. But when you take a look around this sport globally, when you really look at the stands, when you look at the corporate sponsors that are involved, there's nobody who can tell me this sport has not been in decline for a long time and has not rapidly been in decline in 2025 with the absence of John Force. That's my take here today, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We will have more. Here's hoping we can keep pushing ahead with motorsports. Thanks so much for watching. You know, if there's anything fast racing, Racing Jack.